All right. Okay, so we've got three panelists this morning. We've got Karin Labuskaghni from OVR, we've got Renee Reedy from the Wits Herbarium, and we've got Kim Labuschagne from SANBI's Biobank. So we've got three different kinds of collections that are being dealt with. And so I'll just ask, I think I'll ask them to introduce themselves. So Karin, can you introduce yourself?
Morning, my name is Karin Labuskaghni. I'm from the ARC Onderstepoort Veterinary Research Institute, as Michelle said, and I am the researcher and curator of the National Collection of Insects of Veterinary Importance. Thank you.
Thanks, Karin. And Karin doesn't have a camera, so we accept we won't see her. All right, Renee?
Morning. I'm Renee Reedy. I'm from the CE Moss Herbarium.
Oh, we've lost your mic.
Hello.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay, I'm the herbarium manager and I've been in this position for many years. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Renee. Kim?
Morning, everyone. I'm Kim Labuschagne, the Biobank curator at the SANBI Wildlife Conservation Biobank, used to be known as the NZG Biobank. I've been at the Biobank since 2005 and in a curator position from 2014.
Okay, thank you. So I think at this point we'll hand over to Karin for her presentation. Thanks, Karin.
Ethics in the collections at the ARC OVR. Next slide. At the ARC Onderstepoort Veterinary Research Institute, we have a lot of codes of conduct, policies, procedures, acts, and rules that we need to follow for our organization and within our collections. But we also need to be aware of the acts and policies and procedures of the Department of Environment, Fisheries and Forestries, as well as the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. But because we are a veterinary institute, it is mandatory that all our staff that are working in diagnostics or research are actually members of the South African Veterinary Council. Thus, we need to follow all their rules as well. And then there are various voluntary bodies that our staff also belong to, such as the South African Association of Veterinary Technologists or the South African Association of Veterinary, the vets, as well as the animal technicians. So we need to follow their rules as well. Next slide. The main problem or difficulty that comes in for the researchers are to know what permits are needed, what protocols or policies need to be followed, as there are different policies at national level and others at provincial level, and they do not always agree with one another. Then there's also the problem of import permits and export permits. Who must give us these permits? Do we need them from the Department of Environment, Fisheries and Forestry, or do we need them from the Department of Agricultural, Land Reform and Rural Development? Because I had a problem, or not really a problem, but I had a situation where I have an agreement with overseas people that I will send them some samples. And I was told by our legal department, as they were setting up the memorandum of understanding, that I needed an export permit to send these samples overseas. So I contacted the Department of Agricultural, Land Reform and Rural Development. They told me, well, as it is veterinary samples and research samples, I do not need an export permit. but I must find out from the country whether or not they need a veterinary clearance certificate, which I did. And they do not need one. But then our legal department said, but I must get one from Department of Environment, Fisheries and Forestries. And it took quite a while to get hold of the correct person at the department to find out what forms I must fill in. And only after she's actually checked on all the relevant lists for CITES, NIMBA, TOPS, everything, she told me, actually, I do not need an export permit as these insects are not on any of the lists. Then we also have the Animal Diseases Control Act that we need to be aware of and follow, especially the Section 20 applications and procedures. Then we also have the animal ethics, and we have an animal ethics committee at the ARC Onderstepoort, and we need to apply to them for any research we want to conduct that involves any animals or animal products or animal tissues, blood, even feces, as well as insects, especially as all of these products might be infected with a virus or a disease. So we need to follow that as well. And then in most of our labs, we need actually to have SANBI accreditation for the labs to perform, or they are competent to perform specific tasks or tests. But then we also need the Department of Agricultural Land Reform and Rural Development's approval for the labs to perform certain tests for the diagnostics of controlled and notifiable diseases. Next slide, please. So what we know, the procedures we normally follow is, if we are collaborating with people overseas or locally, we will have a memorandum of understanding that need to be approved first by our legal department and then by our CEO of the organization. Then we can apply for ethics clearance to do the work. And only after we have the actual ethics clearance, which can take anything from 1 month up to 8 months or longer, depending on how often the ethics committee can sit and how many problems they find with your application or changes they request for the application. Then we can apply for Section 20. Then we will only be able to apply for any of the permits. We do get permits when we work in national parks, but we do not get any permits when we do farm collections. We will contact the state veterinary office in the area and discuss with them what work we want to do, where we want to work, and they will often either assist us when we are in the field, or they will actually suggest that we visit certain farmers and work with these farmers. Then we will get the farmer's permission to do the actual work. Next slide. So for accessing the collections, we have rules and code of conduct for any visitors, not just into the collections, but onto the premises of Onderstepoort as well. We do not get a lot of requests for loans of specimens, but if we do get, we will not loan out any type specimens, or if we only have a few specimens of that specific species they are looking for. We will tell them we can take photographs for them of the insects and any specific characters they are interested in. These we will send to them with WeTransfer, and if they are not happy with the photographs, they are welcome to come and visit us and look at the actual specimens themselves. but more often we actually have collaborations with the researchers because we are a research institution and we have a lot of research samples available. We will send them a few specimens of these species for their research after we've gotten all the relevant permissions and permits. A problem we've found in the past is with turnover of staff when the researchers either retire or leave. It's happened that some of the samples actually also left, and we only discovered it a few years down the line when we were actually looking for these specific samples. We have a protocol for destructive sampling of specimens, but as I said, we are a research institution, so we do have a lot of research samples, so we are not destroying the only specimen available, because we're not like a museum that will only have one dodo in the whole collection. Next slide. For staff safety, we have an occupational health and safety committee that oversees to all the health and safety issues at the institute. And every building actually has a fire safety officer as well as a medical aid officer. And they receive training regularly. In our new collection room, we have a fire suppression system. And in the other buildings, we will have fire extinguishers. What we found in the past, before we moved the collection over to the new collection room, was that there was a danger of the specimens getting flooded because of the institute is on very clay soils that retain moisture for a long time. If there's a lot of rain, the basement of the buildings tend to flood. Another problem, which I think is more relevant and happens more regularly, is the power interruptions through load shedding or especially cable theft, because very few of our collection rooms actually are on backup power. Because we are such a big institute, there are just not enough backup generation units to supply the whole institute with power if the power goes off. There are safety signs posted throughout all the buildings, and we do have chemical stores and cabinets to store all the dangerous chemicals and other chemicals. And we have our material safety data sheets for all of these chemicals available. Thank you. Next slide. This is something I found online that I feel is very relevant for all collections, not just insect collections. It's the Insect Collectors Code by Caroline Trich and Andrew Deans. I will just read a few of these points, but I will post the link in the chat box for anyone that actually want to download the article and read it for themselves. I will respect the hard-won scientific gains of those entomologists in whose steps I walk, and gladly share my scientific gains and knowledge with those who are to follow. I will aid in the dissemination of scientific knowledge, both to those who study insects and those who do not. I will not discriminate against others. I will strive to create a safe working environment, whether in the field, the classroom, or the lab. I will treat insects humanely. As a collector, it is within my power to take insect life. I will not take insects that will not be deposited in a natural history collection or otherwise be made available for research and education. While bycatch is often unavoidable, I will, to the best of my ability, attempt to reduce the unnecessary loss of insect life and find use for those specimens. I will secure the appropriate permits and permission prior to collecting insects. I will not falsify data. Thank you.
My title is Ethical Dilemmas from the CE Moss Herbarium. And while these are my personal experiences, I'm sure other herbaria have experienced similar things. Collecting and permits. It's difficult getting responses and quick responses to permit applications from some provinces. And often the permits are received a long time after the collecting season is over. Our students often have limited time to collect, and so this leads to collecting without permits. To this end, we are perhaps encouraging unethical or teaching unethical behavior. I have often been, occasionally been guilty of collecting off permit. And I justify this as saying, as long as I take a few shoots, I do no harm. Is this ethical? I ask this question because, next slide, please. A couple of years ago, well, quite a few years ago, before cell phones had good cameras on them, we were collecting in a nature reserve and observed an unusual plant close to where we were doing our collecting, but did not collect it. Years later, we found that it was actually a new rare medicinal plant, and the researchers had only collected it from an area that was not in a reserve. Well, we took the researchers to this reserve where we had thought we'd seen it and tried to locate it using the GPS readings that we had, but sadly it had vanished by the time we went to search for it. Had we taken a sample all those years ago, we would have had a record of this specimen in the reserve. And which leads me to the question, could we have collected it and then added it in retrospect to the permit? Alternatively, when we apply to do collecting, can we add a little addendum to the permit saying we would collect what we are needing for research, but would also like to collect unusual things which we can then share with the respective provincial herbaria. Next slide, please. Access to collections and samplings. We need to be very careful about screening visitors. In the past, we used to have visitors from various pharmacological companies come in to ask to look at our herbarium specimens. My concern was always that on our labels are the localities of these specimens. So if the person coming to view the specimens, the visitor was unethical, they could collect without permits, and which could potentially lead to transgression of the country's environmental laws as well as the Nagoya Protocol. The solution we had for this was only to allow them to view specimens that were widespread, and we would actually hand the specimens to them, not allow them into the collection. We often, with herbarium collections, when we loan specimens, we are adamant that we loan specimens to institutions, but this is not always safe. In the past, we had loaned specimens to researchers at an international university, and when they retired, they took the specimens with them. When we tried contacting the borrowing institution, they just made half-hearted attempts to recover the specimens, and this wasn't just from our herbarium, but several other herbaria. And to this day, we're still waiting for our specimens. With regards to destructive sampling of our specimens, we have a protocol in place, and we only allow sampling from specimens which have sufficient material for sampling, and we do not permit type specimens to be sampled. Next slide, please. Last week, during the webinar, Christina and I had an interesting chat on the ethical disposal of Category 1 weeds. At our herbarium, we have a cupboard full of pom-pom weed, which a student had collected for molecular studies. The plan was to keep only the cited voucher specimens and to dispose of the rest by burning. But how to do so safely we weren't really sure. So the collection is currently lying neglected and has been so for a number of years. Christina had suggested microwaving, and this is a great idea if we are going to dispose of the specimens. However, if we're going to accept the specimens into the collection, the dilemma is that microwaving denatures DNA, so the specimens will not be viable for later molecular work if that needs to be done. And frankly, I'd rather people use the existing specimens than bring us more weedy specimens to accession into the herbarium. We have a strict policy, however, of accepting weedy specimens, and we would only accept those that are vouchers for publications. Next slide, please. One of the things that spoke to me during last week's webinar was that of unsung heroes, which also ties into staff safety. For the past 100 years, the herbarium has had several technicians and preparators who were responsible for pressing, mounting, and filing of specimens, as well as pest management within the collection. Sadly, we have very few records of these unsung heroes who risk their lives and their sanity by using mercuric chloride to poison specimens to safeguard against insect damage. Recently, methyl bromide, which can seep through thick concrete, was the preferred poison for fumigation. Thankfully, these days, those are banned substances and we use less hazardous chemicals, thus ensuring staff safety. It's important, I just want to emphasize the importance of maintaining one's fire suppression systems. Years ago, the fire system in our then herbarium malfunctioned and discharged. Fortunately, this happened during the lunch hour when no one was in the herbarium. But we were able to see the actual results of such an explosive discharge, and it could have been fatal if someone had been there. Currently, our fire system has a manual override that we engage during office hours and when people are working in the collection after hours. The system is also linked to the company that services the system. And we also insist that they come and do a double check after we have our annual fumigations. Next slide, please. Finally, I just want to highlight a few of the useful documents that I found while researching for this chapter of the manual. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, again. So I'm going to be talking about ethics and the SANBI Wildlife Conservation Biobank. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of an overview of what we currently have in the biobank. More than 75,000 individuals, so those are catalogs, 180,000 biomaterials, 204 families from 585 genera, 887 species from 26 countries. Next slide, please. So considerations for compliance with the biobank. This is the legislative framework and other mandates that we need to adhere to make sure that our collection is safe. So the CBD, Nagoya Protocol, CITES, NEMBA, the Bioprospecting Access and Benefit Sharing Amendments. Next slide, please. Threatened or protected species, CITES again and amendments. So there's 1973 and 2010. There's the National Heritage Resources Act, promotion of access to information, effective, transparent, accountable, and coherent government as envisaged in the South African Constitution, the Animal Diseases Act, which is Section 20, of course, Animal Protection Act, and then the Protection of Personal Information Act. Next slide, please. So when I was asked to do a little bit of a presentation about ethics, I sat down and I had to figure out, how do we incorporate ethics into our collection? So I split it into three different sections. So we've got collection ethics, which relates to the biobank collection, so the actual samples. Then we've also got collecting ethics, which relates to the collection of samples, and then also access ethics, which relates to making use of the collection. Next slide, please. So firstly, collection ethics, the dreaded word, Section 20. We have to make sure that we are Section 20 compliant. So even though Section 20 has been in the Animal Diseases Act for quite a long time, we only found out about it in 2014. DAF at that stage, now DALRAD, contacted us and said, because we are sending out samples all the time, we need to be an accredited lab or biobank. Originally, it used to just be laboratories, but now they've actually done it for biobank collections as well. So there was an audit that took place with a full procedure manual and checklist that you had to pass. We had a team of vets come to the facility and they checked everything, SOPs, your waste, which BSL facility level you are, all of that had to be in place to make sure that they could verify that you were you had all of your processes and everything in place. There were 3 queries that we then had to resolve within, I think it was 3 months, and eventually we were then audited and we got a positive response. So we're lucky that we have a top standing permit for the zoo, because we are based at the zoo in Pretoria, and it includes the biobank collection. We are allowed to keep the samples from any top species within the biobank. And then we've also got special permission for any pangolin samples, which are scales and then also carcasses. This also allows us to convey and import and export on the top standing permit. However, the top standing permit doesn't nullify all of the different provincial permits, which we also thought did because it was national. We learned that quite well the hard way as well. CITES permits, so those are for imports for new samples. A lot of the time the biobank, as it's a platform within SANBI, we assist a lot of the researchers to import samples for research projects. So those will be across borders or internationally. So then we will do the CITES permits to ensure that those samples now in the collection are compliant. And then of course you've got your national and provincial permits, which is quite a nightmare sometimes. You need qualified staff and collectors. So qualified staff, I'm registered with the Vet Council, but then also the biobank assistants have to be up to date with all of the collecting protocols. So we're all trained in chain of custody sample collection. This also has some ethical input within sample collection, so that you need to treat the animal right at all times. You need quality assurance of your samples. So your samples need to be banked optimally. We're lucky. I was listening to Corinne's presentation and she said about the power supply. Where the biobank is situated, we're on the same block as the Union buildings and then also the Steve Biko Academic Hospital. So we don't have load shedding, which is lucky. And the few times that the power does go out, we've got a backup generator. We've also got temperature monitors throughout the bank, which then alarms on our cell phones and emails for our 22 fridges and freezers. Occupational health and safety for staff is very important. A lot of people forget that sometimes staff are also, they're going to be coming into contact with the sample, so you have to make sure that they're safe. So we have to ensure PPE. That was one of the things with the Section 20 compliance as well, is your PPE and also your training for your staff, not just working with chemicals, but also working with your samples. So training for working with chemicals, that's quite important in the biobank. We use samples such as, media such as DMSO, which is your dimethyl sulfoxide solution, as well as formalin. Both of them are carcinogenics. Next slide, please. So collecting ethics. So this is actually taking samples from the animals. Again, your section 20. This can be an absolute nightmare if you're working in one province, but you're collecting in 3 different localities. You need state vet letters for each of those localities. So this is for disease control and also for any notifications that they are watching a disease in a certain area. The top standing permit, again, it includes collecting and conveying, as I said just now, your provincial permits, and then of course your landowner permission. So where exactly are you working? If you're in a national park or a game ranch or something like that, you have to have all of those permits in place as well. All of these samples that are coming back to the biobank, if you haven't got the necessary permits in place, it's not ethical collection. You can't say that you have an ethical collection because it can immediately be queried. Your South African Vet Council registration for your sampling, for your vets and paravets. We're lucky that we work in an institution where there are always vets around and vets employed. So the paravets, which I work under our vets. And then also non-registered. What is right and wrong with collecting? So your vet procedure versus non-vet procedure. So that is it an invasive sampling, or is it just collecting some shed skin from a snake or a lizard? So if you're non-registered, you also need to be able to query what the vet is doing, or a paravet. If you think that it's not fair on the animal, then you need to raise your voice. So animals, your well-being, stress, distress, and pain, and then also your amount and number of samples to collect. Your blood volumes, for example. We don't all have an endless supply of blood. So if we're collecting a little tortoise, what happens if you take 10 mils of blood from that tortoise? It'll probably die. You need to work out your percentage of what you can take from the animal with regards to blood. You're also not going to hack off a whole ear for an ear notch. You're going to take a tiny sample and make sure that you clean and sterilize the area, and then also put like Condy's crystals on to prevent any further bleeding. Next slide, please. The access ethics. So this is access to the collection. Again, your section 20. You have to have a section 20 if you are performing research. So we advise anybody accessing the collection that they will need to get their section 20 permit in place. Often they do ask on the new application form, the revised one, for a biobank letter. So we can provide the letter to the researcher to say that the samples will be accessed through the biobank. We usually give the species, the catalog numbers, collecting localities, or any other information that they need. So your CITES import or export. If we're sending samples overseas, we need your CITES export permit for the CITES listed species. And also that also depends on your appendix, what appendix the animal is on. Is it appendix 1 or 2? And that also determines who applies for the permit first. Your veterinary import permits, anything coming into South Africa's borders has to have a veterinary import permit. So, and then of course your provincial permits, still a nightmare. Fair use of the collection. We can't just give out huge amounts of samples all the time and then end up with nothing. We want people to use the collection, but it also has to be a fair request. So we will always keep an archived sample of whatever we had. We will never utilize it completely. And then that is actually marked on our database that we use, specified that it's an archive sample. The conflict of interest, duplication. If you know that it's a duplication request, you need to notify both parties that this is perhaps a duplication. Maybe they can collaborate, but you will have to turn one of them down for access to samples. And then also your access categories. Are there samples that are embargoed? Your IUC and listing. Obviously, we're not going to give cell lines from the northern white rhino to a diploma student to use for a research project. So all of these little things need to be taken into account when we're allowing access to the collection. The principal investigator's institutional approval. This is the ethical approval we need to make sure that the institution is allowing the research to continue. Recently, we've changed our policy for access in that it doesn't go through a SANBI Research Ethics and Scientific Committee. The researchers need to submit that and get that sorted out. But any access to the samples in the biobank comes directly to the curator. We will assess it. If there's any queries, then it goes to a committee. And if it's denied, then there is also an appeals committee in place. There's always a material transfer agreement, including all the terms agreed upon. Recently, we got a cell culture collection from Stellenbosch University. We took over the curation. They actually donated it to us. But one of the terms in that material transfer agreement was that if there's any requests for the samples, then we need to passage or regrow the cells before we send any out. So that's just a renewable resource that we agreed to. And then no commercialization or third parties. You're not allowed to send, if I give you samples, you can't send them to a third party without disclosing it. That's unethical behavior. At this stage, there's no commercialization of our samples either. Next slide, please. Just some of the issues that we've come across in the past plenty years, actually, with permits. So there's 9 different provinces with requirements. All of them have got their own requirements. Sometimes the permit applications are very, very confusing. Sometimes there's only owner details as apart from applying on behalf of an organization. A lot of people joke about the Republic of Cape Town because Cape Town has its own set of standards a lot of time, or Cape Province at least. A lot of the permitting offices are understaffed and there's a lot of open vacancies within the departments. At one stage in Limpopo Province, there were 23 open positions. I think there were maybe 3 in the whole permitting office. So to try and get a reply sometimes is a nightmare. Outdated contact details that we found with the section 20. So on the DELRAD website, you can actually have a look at the state vet districts, and then there's a whole pile of contact details for the different provinces. But they are very, very outdated. I think they were last updated in 2015. Uninformed staff. Years ago, we had to apply to the district state vet for a section 20, and the poor man was wholly confused. He didn't know what a section 20 was and asked whether we're not meeting a section 10. So had to send him the documents, the application form, to show him what was actually required. And then also the compliance, the section 20, the audit and the long checklist, it's very daunting at a time, but once you get it done, then you know that you're compliant and nobody can come and tell you to incinerate your collection. I know there was a lab in Pretoria that was having the compliance or the audit done, and they came across a bag of samples in a fridge with absolutely no markings on, and they asked for the paperwork. And when they couldn't present the paperwork, they were told to incinerate it. So that's the risk of our collection. I mean, we started our collection in the late 1990s. So to tell us to incinerate or dispose of our entire collection it's a nightmare. Can't even think of that. Next slide, please. And then some of the issues in collections as well. Orphan collections. Are all of the permits in place? You have to make sure that if you are taking on an orphan collection, that you've got everything in place before actually accessioning it into your collection. Tissues with no permits, do you take them or not? So like the collecting of a rare plant in the field, this is the same. So somebody's got very rare black rhino or northern white rhino samples, but there's no permits. Do you take them? So you need to evaluate what the value of the sample is. A lot of the times with section, not a lot of the times, but on a few occasions with section 20, even with CITES permits, we don't have collecting permits for the original samples, but we disclose that to them. And because we are a national facility as well, and that we've got all of our data in place, they can come and request it at any time. Usually they will release or issue the permits. So your sample request size, a lot of the times researchers will say, do you have lion samples? And you can send them a list for them to have a look through. And then they'll say, okay, they'll take one from every single sample. So if that's like 1,500 different lions in the biobank, we don't send them every single sample. They need to do a representative sampling. It's only fair. They also can't ask for 5 mils of blood for a genetic study when you can give them 100 microliters. Assessing requests. This also becomes a little bit tricky. With our assessing little steps that we've now put in place, we do things like IUCN Red List. So as I said before, you're not going to give northern white rhinos to a diploma student. How many samples do you have in the biobank from that animal? Again, they can't request every single sample representing that species in the biobank. What is their track record like? And things like this, we're starting to store, because if, for example, somebody has requested samples, yet they send it on to a third party, that's immediately going on our blacklist, because it's in the material transfer agreement that nothing will be sent out like that, and they're signing it. And then also your bias towards your own organization. There can't be a bias, otherwise nobody's going to use you. So because we're funded by government, we need to be open to any researcher requesting samples. Next slide, please. And then just some final thoughts. Publications these days, you have to have your permits in place, because a lot of publications actually request permit details, permit numbers, who it was issued to, for what it was issued to. We had just a researcher from KZN somewhere, and they pulled his publication because they didn't have Section 20 permits in place. So they are allowed to do that. You have to make sure that your permits are all in place. I was on a paper for penguins for genome sequencing, and everybody, all the contributors, I mean, there were, I think, 30 plus more of us. We all had to indicate which permits were in place for use of those samples, permit numbers, everything. Also, your choice between invasive and non-invasive sampling. If you can get away with non-invasive sampling, then do it. Sometimes it is, the animal is going to be immobilized anyway for a health check, like in the case of the zoo. So therefore, we'll take optimal samples. And we will optimally sample the animal as well. We're not going to let it just be immobilized and not take as many samples as we can, within reason, of course. A lot of slow processes, it gives rise to a lot of frustration, but this is it's not a quick process on accessing any collections. These days, permits take a lot of time, so you need to factor that in when you are starting your studies as well. And then permit applications, your sequence, it saves a lot of time. We've also been guilty of that, where we've applied for a veterinary import permit, and then CITES takes ages to issue, and in that time the veterinary import permit is expired or lapsed. Then you have to start that process again. So try and work out a good sequence of actually applying for your permits in time. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much to the 3 panelists. If anybody wants to put a question to them, you can put it in the chat, and we'll pick it up. So I have a few questions just to ask them, and I'll go through each of them. So Karin, from your side, is there an ethics policy in the ARC OVI? Do you have an actual ethics policy?
Yes, we have a ethics policy for doing business with the ARC, but that includes all the work we do, but not specifically for the collections.
Okay. All right. So it doesn't mention anything about the collections.
No, nothing.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And Renee? I'm sure WITS has an ethics policy, but have you looked at it and seen whether the collections or...
Sorry. The ethics norm seems to be based mainly around the animal collections and human ethics. So I don't think there's much on the plant side of it. And well, we have the staff code of conduct and research code of conduct, but the actual plant collection, I don't think so.
Okay, yeah. So maybe in the research code of conduct, some of the issues might be covered.
Yes. Mhm.
And then Kim, so you would have to speak for SANBI now. I don't know if you've seen the ethics policy.
There's a code of conduct for research, as far as I know. And then I know the Animal Research Ethics Committee, it talks to, I think there is a research, an ethics policy in place, but I'm just not sure as to how it applies to collections. I know it will be there for the animal welfare, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, just, with the zoo merging with SANBI, I'm sure the zoo had very clear ethics policies, and I think ours are still being worked on. So I don't think it's that clear, and I don't think that there's anything that's collection specific. So it might actually be a gap. So I think most institutions will have a gap when it comes to an ethics policy, either one at an institutional level, but that covers collections, or something specific for collections. And so that's part of the assignment for the people doing the course, is to actually go and look at your institutional ethics policy, see if there is one, see if the collections are mentioned, and all the other issues that we've been talking about last week and today. So things like permits, health and safety, but specific to the collections. Okay, I can see now there's some questions coming through. Yeah, so Kim, Kim's presentation is enough to make you not want to ever have a biobank, Lee. From last week. So Daniela has one from last week. Okay, so you can ask on audio. Daniela, do you want to go?
Hi, sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so it's actually with regards to a little bit of a different side thing, and it's just because I've recently come in contact with it in terms of decolonializing science, which is, there are quite a few ant species that have a derogatory term as their scientific name, and also the localities. And I'm not going to say the word, but it's the K word. And I just wanted to know what people's thoughts are about changing those names to a different descriptor that's another word. And we've checked the origin of the word to make sure that it is not like a different origin, it is the origin of the word. And, you know, for us, we want to start moving forward and changing this so that it's not associated with this at all. And I just wanted to know what people's opinions on it were.
Okay, good question, Daniela. Thank you. We didn't actually talk about that last week, but I know it's come up at SANBI with the plants, because it's the same situation with the plants. And I know that we were actually considering going through the process of changing names. I think that it's a valid reason to do it. So if a name is potentially offensive, I mean, we can't change old locality names, but we can change current species names. So I don't know if anybody else wants to come in there. Anybody ever changed a name? And I think especially in terms of our country. Fossils. Okay, Cameron, do you want to speak?
Hi there, everyone. Yeah, so we've also got a similar issue over here with fossil names. So we've got actually a couple hundred that we've managed to identify, as well as stratigraphic names, so names of actual rock units that carry offensive names to them. So I've just recently amended the name for a biogeographic region, and like the ICZN, there's sort of rules and regulations on how one needs to change these names. So this was put through on the International Commission for Biostratigraphic Names to have this thing changed. But the issue that one has is trying to enforce that people use the changed name itself. This is the problem that we've got now, is that even though the name has been changed, we have people, call it ignorance or what, that are insistent on not using that name any further, or the new name. So it's all fair and well. Yes, I think that we do need to change these names. We need to make people aware of these issues as well. But again, it's how to enforce that those names are flagged, as well as the new names, the amended names, how these things are reinforced. So do you have a policing committee? I guess, who knows? I mean, there are very few taxonomists left in the world that would actually be able to flag this. So yeah, but yes, we need to do this. I think all of us do.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. Yeah, so I think that you'd find that people are in agreement that we should formalize changing names, especially of species. And you know, if you do it formally, then that's the formal name. And then for publications, you know, reviewers should insist that it's the new name, the changed name that's used. I mean, it always takes time to get change into accepted and used in communities. But if we don't start with doing it, then it won't happen. So I think it is something to work towards. So David Allen has also posted something here saying the common English names of 2 bird species have recently been changed. And that's, yeah, that's great. Yeah. Daniela? Did you want to say something?
Because it's such a big community. Yes, sorry. There is a big community, but there's a standard. So we're getting a lot of resistance in trying to change those names because they're like, it's not the standard is this has already been described. This is already the name. And we're like, yes, but the name isn't great. So, but I just wanted to say thank you very much to know that it's proper and everyone agrees that it should be changed to, you know, and addressed.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so some people will be resistant, but I think you can justify changing it. Okay, then there was a question here. I have a question to SANBI staff. Christina. Christina?
Hi, Michelle. Let me see if I can do my video. My question, I was thinking of when Renee spoke. Lately, I've had quite a few queries from people that are clearly fishing for sort of bioprospecting information. And I mean, you can spot it from a mile. So, I mean, in the past, you know, we always try and be helpful, but, you know, people then ask you, can we go and help them collect stuff and this? And I just know the permitting is a nightmare. So I just want to be honest and say, I've been referring them to SANBI herbaria, and I hope you guys don't mind. Because I get the impression that people go through, say, university and non-SANBI herbaria thinking that we're going to be more lenient or more happy to assist them or something. But the truth is that we're not. I know that you can't deny someone access to a collection. I understand that. But what they're asking is not specific. They're asking very vague questions for localities and information, and often from dodgy places. So I just wanted to say, is it a good idea for us to rather refer people like that to official SANBI herbaria, especially if there's no reason for them to go to another regional herbarium? And do you guys mind? Because I just kind of feel that they might, if they get the message from a National Institute herbarium, that they might actually realize that people are really serious. What I also then do is I send them the BABS regulations, linked to the bioprospecting regulations, so that they're aware. So I try and look up all those things and send it to them. And I'll be honest, I never get come back. Then none of them come back and say, ooh, sorry, or whatever. They just sort of disappear. So I know it's a cop-out, but is it okay for us to do that? Because I'd rather they got that official message from SANBI, because I just think they can bypass SANBI and proper process by going to other herbaria. And also for those people that are getting requests like that, maybe that's a way to deal with. if they're legit researchers, and you know, that's fine. But you can just tell that they just bioprospectors trying their luck. So that might be a way forward. And then also, who do we really send them to? I just send them to General SANBI and I say, go look on the website. But who would be a good person to deflect questions like that to? Corin Bear, maybe? I don't know. But it would help us to have an official to take for queries like that.
Yeah. So I think within SANBI, we've been struggling as well to sort of get our heads around how we deal with the biodiversity access and benefit sharing. And I know that we don't have a tight, well-run, well-functioning system. But, you know, between the gardens and the herbaria, and now we've got the zoo, but I mean, it's a lot of it's to do with medicinal bioprospecting with using plants, and for the nursery trade. And so traditionally the garden people have just sent material to whoever asked for it. And that's been a problem. And I mean, we used to supply seeds to whoever wanted them in the world. And so that's kind of been shut down, but there isn't a clear policy about what do we do when somebody asks us to partner in a bioprospecting project, to help them, to provide data to them, or anything like that. We don't have it. And I know Corin was trying to get it sorted out for a long time, and it was just really difficult because it needs to be at the top, need to make those decisions. Because it's also a fine line. So yes, we want to play a meaningful role in the economy of the country. We want to play a meaningful role in new drug discovery. So we want to be relevant, we want to play that role, but we also have to be careful because there's law and there's ethics around exploitation and asset benefit sharing. So who would benefit from that kind of thing? So in terms of SANBI, there's a lot of policy development and discussion and things that still need to happen. It's not clear, but I would refer them to General SANBI or to Corin. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'll keep doing that then. But I think it is also to make sure people just know what the legislation is, and the link to the BABS legislation is the most important one for. I think often people don't realize it exists, so that's something we must keep sharing.
Yeah, so it is good.
Our countries don't know it exists either, because universities think they're just running a student project, but they don't realize there's still a form they need to fill out as an initial form just to say we're doing research on this, so that it's recorded in case in future it gets picked up commercially. That initial form still needs to be filled out. And I know for a fact that's not happening, but it should be. So yeah.
Yeah. It's a very, very tricky thing. Okay, so let's see if there's anything else here in the chat. Okay, so no other questions. So this whole thing about ethics is a very big issue. So what we looked at a herbarium, an insect collection, and a mammal or a vertebrate wildlife biobank. Are there any specific issues relating to ethics when it comes to fossils? We didn't hear from a paleontology perspective. So Cameron or Bernard or one of our other paleontologists who are here.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, this is it's an interesting thing because in the paleosciences, ethics has never sort of been a big thing. And also, I don't think any of the institutions have, or the country certainly has no paleoscience specific ethics policy, because we tend to fall under the many ethics committees there are. For example, WITS, I think, has 6 different ethics committees. All 6 of them have been used by paleosciences in the past. But when it comes to actual fossils, it's kind of people make up shit along the way. You know, we have some dilemmas in terms of the usual ethics, in terms of when material is available for other people to use. There tends to be a huge problem with people taking ownership of material and hanging on to it for 20 to 30 years before allowing anyone else access. But that's not just common to us. But more recently, we're starting to think about the ethics of the hominin material we have, creatures that are on their way to becoming human, which are just treated like any other fossil. Fossil humans that are our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, but in fact don't fall under the current ethics, because when people think of a fossil, they don't think that that fossil is in fact us, where the exact same principles should apply as what apply to modern humans. And I was thinking earlier that the only reason they don't worry about ethics is that no one's going to come after you. The 72,000-year-old human has no family that'll come and harass you on it. Whereas if you have modern humans, you have direct descendants that are worried about it. But when we get Khoisan groups coming and saying those are our ancestors, and explaining that as scientists, surely you should know if that's Homo sapiens and we Homo sapiens, why would you change the ethical rules around it just because it's tens of thousands of years old? And that's very much a Eurocentric approach. The moment something's 400 or 500 years old, we don't seem to care anymore. And then there's a lot of other issues about permitting, sites, loans of material to other institutions and what people do with it while it's out on loan, which I think are the sort of issues all of us are faced with.
Yeah, and I'm sure private collections as well. Can you imagine finding this like amazing little fossil while you're on a field trip? And wouldn't you like to put it on your own bookshelf at home?
Yeah, we are actually not all that aware of private collections, because I think the private collections are kept very private. The people who do the collecting know what the law is, and our law is extremely strict in South Africa. You are not allowed to own, buy, sell, or destroy any fossil apart from coal without a permit. So it's probably the strictest heritage laws concerning fossils in the world. But there are amateur paleontological groups that I'm discovering on Facebook who go out on weekends and collect material, but they don't post any of their collections. They don't talk about them. So who knows what's going on out there, not to mention probably an illicit fossil trade as well.
Sure. Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, so it's a little bit of a different way of thinking about ethics when you come to fossils. And the other thing that we didn't really talk about was if there's anything specific in the marine environment. So the people who work on marine species, did you think of anything that the panelists didn't cover today? I mean, it must be very hard to know where are you allowed to collect up to when you go out on a ship. Where is the border of the country? Nkosinathi, haven't you done any collecting at sea?
Morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I have collected from this from Reunion Island to PE, but I think the permit was, I think the Friends of Nansen had the permit, so I never had to deal with permits. But my responsibility was just to collect because everything was taken care of. So most of the guys at SAIB now, the collections guys, you know, we don't collect, we receive collections and process them.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I was just wondering, like, how do you know when you're in South Africa and you're not in South Africa? In African waters, I think there's a boundary, but I mean, a fish will swim up and down. You know, a fish won't a boundary of the sea. Yeah, in terms of bringing material from other countries, has anyone dealt with the benefit sharing? So if you take stuff from another country, what is the benefit to that country? No, it's a very important thing to think about. We don't want to be colonialists all over again, going to other countries and taking their biodiversity for our collections.
Though there's a question that was posted in the chat by Kerry Hunter. I don't know if she wants to ask it in the meeting or she wants it to just read out.
Kerry, where's Kerry? Kerry, yes. Go.
Hi, sorry to worry you with this. I was just wondering, when I was looking at the ICOM Code of Ethics and the Museum Code of Ethics in terms of data sharing and that sort of thing, and there's, well, in general, there seems to be a bit of a move to open source databases and data and that sort of thing. I was just wondering, is it, for a number of reasons, is it ethical to do that though? Because, sorry, I think I put it quite badly in the message there. The data that we put out there today might be crucial in the future, such as if there was little conch shell, and there's quite a lot of research with conch shells with medicinal research. If there's a breakthrough and that particular shell becomes so valuable, the data we put out years ago might lead people to those shells and contribute to it becoming, well, it being injected and becoming extinct. And also on that same sort of plane of thought, is it also ethical when you clean out that sort of data? It removes that vital sort of link between researchers and museums, and there would be no sort of control, or we wouldn't know what people publish or use the data for or anything like that. So I was wondering in terms of how actually ethical it is to publish data and all that sort of thing.
Okay, maybe I'll ask Ian to answer this. So we've done lots of discussion and thinking about data, open data, access, secret data. Ian, do you want to come in?
Yeah, so that's a tricky question, Gary. I must admit, I don't think anyone's ever actually posed that particular example. So when we look at data sharing, we obviously want to make sure that we protect any taxa that need to be protected now. So we've got, there's a platform called the National Sensitive Species List, which is run by SANBI, and it includes the species names of any species that are considered to be sensitive, that if releasing their data to the public might threaten those species in the wild. So so it's got various things on there that people try to go out and collect, or that might be at risk of over harvesting or anything like that. But that's obviously not like a it's not looking forward into the future and saying, well, in the future, these particular shells might be particularly valuable and therefore we need to be protecting those data now. Like that starts to get difficult because, you could make the argument for anything. Any plant or animal might be found to have some kind of, benefit or value in the future that makes it, something that's in high demand. So I think the general thing is that we have to kind of weigh the pros and cons. So at the moment, the reason that we're wanting to get the data out there freely is because we want to enable the kinds of research that feeds into conservation activities, that feeds into policy development around climate change, all of that kind of thing. So that's the reason for promoting open data access. And we kind of hope that the benefits of that trying to basically save the planet might, that's what we're basically weighing against, these other examples like the one that you've presented.
Thank you for the answer. Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, Ian.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Thanks. So yeah, so this is one of the biggest challenges, is actually getting the collection institutions to agree to make their data openly accessible for anybody who wants to do research, or to do red listing, or to do spatial planning to identify which are the critical areas. And a lot of the collection-based researchers see this as their own data. They've built up this database, they've done the collecting, and they feel a sense of ownership, and they don't want to let it go. And in reality, if your collection isn't used for all of these different purposes, it has no value. It has no value except to you as an individual. But you're asking the state to pay a lot, your salaries, that's what we spoke about last week. Think of the investment from the government, and that's for the collection to be used by the global community, not for your personal use only. So it is a very, very challenging issue. I think the access and the permitting are two very, very big challenges that us as a community face, and they both have very big ethical impacts. Any other questions from the community, maybe to any of the panelists? So, yeah, I think it was also very, it's very interesting to sort of hear some of the dilemmas that people have faced about when they've had to, like, should I pick that plant? I know that it's special, but I don't have it on my permits. But what will I be losing if I don't take it? And things like, oh, I know that I should be dealing with that collection sitting there, but I don't actually know how to deal with it. You often have these boxes in your collection of things that present problems, and it's easier to just walk past it every day and not look. So I don't know if any of you have any examples to share. We won't report you to anybody, but just that kind of dilemma that you've been faced with in terms of ethics, so similar to the ones we've heard this morning. So Bernard, do you want to go?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I think this was what came up the other day, was collecting roadkill.
Oh, yes.
And when you're seeing it, and you know, all of us on this side are responsible. We see something we've always wanted in the collections. There's no way we're leaving it out on the road. Also trespassing onto private land. And you know what it's like in South Africa. Before you know it, you're sitting on somebody else's private land, busy sort of digging up soil and looking through plants and these sorts of things. And it's kind of, everyone thinks it's actually okay to do, but I've given this a lot of thought. And either you're following rules or you're following ethics or you don't. And what must we do in future? Or like you said, Michelle, and others, is the system making it so difficult to follow any rules or to get the permits that we have to, you know, look after ourselves? It's like the new potential Firearm Act. Can we rely on the state to keep us safe?
Yeah, thanks, Bernard. I think, I mean, like if you sit on the roadside of a fence, you've got to wait for that ant to come across under the fence and onto the road, then it's not on private land anymore. But then it's on a road, and you're also not really supposed to collect on the road without a permit. But you can kind of see how ridiculous it is, like literally 10 seconds and 10 centimeters, and your whole permit requirement changes completely. And is that really logical? I'm not encouraging people to to break the law. I think we all have to try our very best, but I think that all of these kind of illogical issues need to be raised with authorities, and it may be a long journey to trying to get some sense into permitting authorities, but I think we have to try. It's really very, very difficult for people now. Any other stories about when you've had an ethical dilemma, Komlani?
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to find out if I go to my village and I would like to do a collection in certain parts of my village, and I go to the chief who's the custodian of the land there, and he happens not to know what kind of a machine that I'm supposed to be getting from him, how I will be in a position to be offered to assist him to provide me the kind of permission that is required of his side, so that I can have the collection that I will be collecting in that space and then accepted in back my institution.
Yeah, so my knowledge, not my knowledge, my understanding of the law, and I suppose it's quite a different thing, is under that circumstance, so if it's privately owned land, in some provinces you need a permit from the permitting authority, in others you don't. But you need written landowner permission. It gives you permission to collect that material and to put it into a collection and to use it for research. And so you would have to explain to that chief why you want to collect that material, and he would have to sign, he or she would have to sign permission for you to go and take it. And then when you put it into the collection, there's the copy that it was legally collected with the permission. And the next thing is, what if you wanted to give some of that to another researcher? The law also says then you need permission again to pass it on to a third party, unless you had that permission from the original land, from the landowner. So it's very hard. I know a lot of private people, farmers, tribal people, they don't want to sign something. They don't trust what it's all about. And so you have to, it's called prior informed consent. You have to explain very carefully what you're going to use that material for. And if you were going to use it for any research that had any kind of potential bioprospecting economic benefits, that would have to all be explained. And you can't use it, if you didn't get permission when you collected it, you can't get permission later. There's no retrospective permission on that. So it really, really is very difficult. But Pumlani, yeah, you'd have to explain very carefully and get written permission from that chief. Any other questions? Fulu, are there any other hands?
Renee has a hand up. And
Renee.
then Zama.
And then Zama. Okay, Renee.
I just want to know, if we're collecting on the permit, do you state that you will be collecting multiple samples to distribute to other herbaria? Does it have to be stated in the permit application?
So, yeah, so if it's for your herbarium and then you're going to be sending material on loan, then it's usually fine. Then you're collecting and they understand that you're collecting for a herbarium, which usually just, provide. But if you're going to be taking tissue samples to supply, so destructive sampling, permanent donation, then you do need a special permit. Kim, can you maybe help us with this? So
Not
when
really.
you for a permit,
Yeah.
do you specify that from the biobank that sample could be distributed to other people?
When we do collection trips, especially regarding section 20, then they know that it's to add to the collection. And because they know what a biobank is, then they will give the permission or not. But the other collecting permits, provincial or anything, no, they don't sometimes even ask for numbers. I think because we apply on behalf as the biobank, and most people know what a biobank is these days, that it's a collecting facility. It's either approved or declined.
Okay, and Kim, so every time you supply a sample for destructive sampling, do you have to get a permit for that?
We don't really call it destructive sampling though, because we provide a subsample of our parent tissue all the time. So that's the only permit that we apply for. So we will give an aliquot, say 100 microliters of a 2 ml blood sample. We need to indicate, especially with CITES, you have to indicate exact volume, how it's preserved. So it'll be 2 by 2 centimeter piece of skin in ethanol. That has to go on the permit. But it's not really for destructive. We don't indicate that it's destructive sampling.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So most of the authorities do say that if you're going to be passing on material to a third party, you need to get permission to do that from the permitting authority. So it's not for loans, because loans is a temporary thing. But if you're planning to give away, if you're going to, if someone asks you for a tissue sample, then you are going to have to get permission to do that. Maybe collecting authorities will allow you to put it into your original collecting permit.
Okay.
Sorry, Renee.
No, I just want to say it's not a tissue sample, but it's a specimen, a duplicate specimen of what we've collected. So would you say we will collect additional samples for distribution to other herbaria?
Yeah, you can ask them if they would allow you to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I would be very clear about it. You know what people are so worried about now is this issue of people stealing our biodiversity and commercializing it and making a fortune without any benefit to our country. So that's the big thing about distributing to third parties. And, you know, the ARC people will know this with their microbial collections a lot. Zama?
Good day, everyone. My question is pretty straightforward. Since now everyone is aware of the regulations that are in place, is it compulsory for each specimen that we now collect or that we now add on the collection to have a permit? Is it compulsory? I mean, that is my question.
Yeah, so it's not a simple yes, no answer because it will depend. It will depend where it came from. It will depend what it is. Sorry, I was breaking up a bit there. I don't know if you got that. Yeah, so it depends on what species it is, what kind of thing it is, and where it's from. But basically, every specimen should have some kind of evidence that it was legally collected. So it would be better if you didn't know about the legislation, hey, Zama? Because then you could at least say, well, I don't know. Now we've told you, now you know.
Tanya has her hand up and then Jermaine.
Tanya.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I don't have a video, but I would like to ask a question. So I'm asking for research purposes. Sometimes you would need to buy material, like say you're doing medicinal plant research. So now you probably maybe you need to buy material. Is that unethical? Because now sometimes the people that sell a material can collect unethically. Like I mean, like some of them don't have permits. So when it comes to publications, would they accept your publications because you bought this and you don't have a permit for the material that you're actually using?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, very good question, Tanya. So we've had experience of this very same thing. So we were working on the Barcode of Wildlife project a few years ago. And they wanted to do DNA barcoding to see what was being sold in the traditional muti markets. And we know that there are SARCADs, there are CITES, there's leopard, there's shark, there's all kinds of things there, protected species. And so we also thought, well, we'll get people to buy samples and then we'll do it. But we were also working with the green scorpions and with the National Prosecuting Authority. And they said to us, if you buy that, you can be arrested. You're breaking the law because that material doesn't have a permit. And they kind of turn a blind eye to the traditional use of that material. But if we'd bought it, we could have been arrested. And so it's a very difficult situation. So eventually they went, so they can seize it. The legal authorities can seize it and then give it to the researchers to use. But you can't actually, I mean, you can buy it for your personal use, but you can't buy it for research. So it's a very difficult thing. I mean, I didn't know that.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. I've actually been wondering for a long time.
Yeah, we didn't even, I mean, I worked many years ago, I also worked on an invertebrate project with the traditional market, and we bought samples and we published it, but that was a long time ago. Things have changed. We've got a lot more kind of cautious and aware of the law. Fulu, who was next?
Sorry, Michelle, just a follow up on that one.
Yeah.
When we were doing the Bagoro of Wildlife, I remember we were in KZN, we bought fish in the fish market there. But I think we did have a permit to fish, but we just bought. Will that cover that?
Yeah, so if those people who caught that fish, did they have a fishing license or a fishing permit? So if they were allowed to sell.
Yeah, I don't think we asked. I don't remember asking. We just bought the fish. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is difficult, hey? Yeah. Just got to think: has this material that I'm buying, has it been legally obtained? And is there evidence of that legal catching of it or harvesting of it? Yeah. Okay, I think you said Jermaine, hey?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Hello.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, I just want to ask for someone who likes to take pictures, for an example of insects and all that, and then they happen to post them on like social media and stuff. Let me just give you an example. If I happen to see a fence, but I see an interesting specimen or insect there, and I take a picture of that, but only to realize later when I've posted that picture that it's a rare species, and then someone wants to do a research on it, but I have already posted it. Am I in the wrong? Am I going to be punished or something like that?
No. So pictures are fine. So the only issue, so that's fine. I mean, it's not like anybody can steal our biodiversity from a picture. So what the concern is that you can use DNA to kind of manufacture something, but you can't use a picture for that. But where we've into problems recently has been around our naturalist. So I don't know if you know our naturalist. So
I've heard of.
Yeah, you can post your picture of your insect with the locality, and then the specialist will tell you what it is. And we do actually use the data for red listing and for all kinds of things. And what they found was that people were using our naturalists to find very rare special plant species, the localities, and they were poaching those plants. And so they've had to quickly take down all those photos of those species that are targeted.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Fuller? Let's just see what's coming through on the chat.
There's David coming up next, and then Alpheus.
Okay, David.
Yeah, is that working?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Yeah, just you know, the whole years I've been in museums, you know, very often what happens is members of the public and other parties do bring material to the museum, and whether we like it or not, this is actually seen by a lot of people out there as our primary function, that we look after and accept interesting and valuable things and keep them for the nation. If we then start turning people away who come to us and say, hey, look, I have this interesting thing that they could have got from 100 different sources, from killed by their cat to given to them from their grandfather's collection, etc., etc. If we start turning them away, our credibility will come into question. They're going to look at us and say, that place has got themselves tied up in knots. They don't realize what they're actually there for. The reason why I pay my taxes is for people to deal with me when I bring something like this to them. So much as we can feel very self-justified about turning them away and think we're doing something good, we're going to lose credibility. I accept that we have this legislation, but essentially what it's going to mean is that if somebody brings a dead bird to me, I'm going to have to tell them to take it to the permitting authority to get it legitimized before it can come to the museum. And I don't think SANBI KZN Wildlife, as one of the key permitting authorities, is going to be very pleased about that. They are, I know, essentially, are quite happy for me to take all of this material. In fact, they are people that steer me a great deal of it in the first place. So for me to have to go to them, which it sounds like I'm going to have to do, and say, look, I'm going to send these people to you and up your workload when I could have taken it and processed it in the normal fashion, is again going to affect our credibility as an institution. We're going to not make ourselves popular with people out there who have preconceived ideas about what we're supposed to be doing. But we can do that. And I'll see what SANBI KZN Wildlife think of that. I mean, they will then have to get freezer facilities to hold material, etc., etc. Or they'll probably just tell the people, take it to some other institution that has a lower bar, or keep it in a private collection, or throw it away. You know, none of those things are better options than it coming into the museum in the first place. So, you know, we're kind of making a big problem for ourselves, I suspect, in many ways. And it's hard to really know how to get around it. And especially if we have more than one permitting organization that needs to be appeased, is a person then going to have to take the same specimen around half a dozen different permitting authorities, some of whom are situated in different cities? So you'll get your section 20 here, you'll get your local provincial conservation permit from this quarter, which is in a different place. It's going to be very, very unwieldy. And I would have thought the people at the top really should have been acting at the top so that this isn't being brought to the lower levels where I operate and being made into my problem. But anyway, I think I've said enough. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, David. So I think lots of us feel exactly the same way. I really do. I think everybody's just like throwing up their hands. I mean, Crystal Tolley was saying the other day, she runs her herpetology biobank. She doesn't want it anymore. She said she has to show that her snakes and her lizards can't possibly have foot and mouth disease. And they're snakes, they don't have legs. She said they don't have feet. How can they have foot and mouth? But we are living, I mean, it has become insanity, and it's not reasonable and it's not logical. But the thing is that it's the law. It's the law. And so the risk that we have to be aware of is that if you take material of a top species, and that if you accept it in and it was illegally collected, your institution is liable for a 5 million rand fine. You can lose your job because you've broken the law. The law says you have to have evidence that it was legally collected. And so that's the difficult thing, is that how do you, what do you do? Do you run the risk of bringing your institution into disrepute, putting them at financial risk because they could get a huge fine? And then the other issue is the Section 20, the Animal Disease Control Act. And that's where our biggest challenge comes from. Because if you're taking in rats, bats, dead birds, and you don't know where they came from, you don't know how they were collected, you don't know what disease they're carrying, you don't know if they've got another new kind of coronavirus, and you take them into your collection, you don't follow proper procedure. Can you imagine being the person responsible for the next global pandemic? And that's what they're scared of. And it doesn't even have to be the next global pandemic, but it could be something that wipes out our chicken industry, something that wipes out our beef industry, that our egg industry. And so that's the kind of thing that we're having to be aware of. So the law at the moment is insane. And what we do need to do is to try and make it more reasonable so that we can do our jobs, but legally and safely. And the people up there, whoever those people up there are, I don't think they know about what we're facing, and I don't think they really care. They've got bigger issues to deal with. But anyway, what we've got this paper, Lee, Ian, Karen, B, and me, we've written a paper. It should be in SA Journal of Science quite soon. There's another whole tribe of researchers who've also submitted another commentary. And once it's published, we can start taking it up with the authorities to try and find a way forward. But it's actually not our decision about whether we ignore the law or we try and work within it. It's the law. So very difficult. Who is the next person, Fulu? Alpheus.
Good morning, good day, colleagues. I'm just following up on your answer, Michelle, to Jermaine regarding sending of image. I feel we cannot just say it is fine, she can send the image, provided the image does not contain the locality of the species that she is sending. Otherwise, that will be exposing the protected species at the very same locality to the person, and especially if she does not have a record of what is going to be done with the image. So my feeling is maybe Jermaine should have a spreadsheet of all the species that are listed so that in the future she can have a reference before she process or send out something like that. So I just wanted to check that part, because if you send image disclosing everything, then it means you expose the species itself. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alpheus. So I think that really depends on what it is and whether it's targeted by illegal collectors, So that's what I was saying, like with the succulents that went onto our naturalist, those images were used by poachers. But we've got to be reasonable. We can't lock all information away from everybody and like David said, like tie ourselves in knots. We've got to be reasonable. So, students use our naturalist and the images there all the time to get additional localities. So imagine if we shut all of that down, then we we're not serving any purpose. So it's a matter of just being careful and understanding when will it be a risk to release the locality, but when can you release the locality? So yeah, knowing which are the species on that sensitive species list is important for that. Yeah. Pulu?
There's a question from Nelisi on the chat. She says, now that we say each specimen requires the permit, how do we deal with the thousands of specimens that are in our collections without permits?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a very good question. And so, yeah, we've been trying to get clarity because there's something, so like David said, if a collection is historical and it was collected before, I think, before the legislation was published, then there was obviously no need to have a permit. If it's CITES, then it's pre-1975, it didn't need a permit, but it does now. So it's also, again, it's not simple, but basically, it's usually from the time of publishing a particular piece of legislation. When that comes into force, then the permitting requirements for that piece of legislation need to be acted on. So if you've got something collected in 1940, there's no permit, that's absolutely fine. That was the way it was in those days. If you've got something that was collected last year from a protected area and you don't have a permit for it, you probably could be in trouble. But we've been trying to get some understanding from the permitting authorities about what to do. So please don't destroy anything in your collection because it doesn't have a permit. We're all sitting in this difficult situation. And I think you're fine, don't panic about it. And if somebody had to bring you a collection from their grandfather, and it was all old material, I would say there's not going to be permits. You just need a donation form signed by them saying that they're giving it to you. And this is where it came from. So in that case, you probably don't need to worry about permits. So it's very, not easy to always know the answer. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
There's one from Eunice. She says, do I need a permit to loan an insect outside or within the country? If yes, how can I apply for it? Do I need a permit to accept a donated specimen in the museum?
So yeah, so that's a good question. So for loaning, and it's not clear in the law, in the legislation. So when I've read all the different laws, wasn't quite clear. And again, it's not one simple answer. But it seems that to loan material inside of South Africa is fine. You don't need a permit for that. Unless it's a TOPS listed, but you said it's an insect. So there are insects on TOPS. So if it's not TOPS, then you don't need. If it is TOPS, you do need a permit. And what was even more frightening, and I think Kim can maybe give us more information. So if you loan a TOPS listed, a threatened or protected species, if you loan it to another institution, they have to have a standing permit to be able to hold it. If it's a CITES listed species, then whoever you're sending it to needs to be CITES registered. But normal things, if they're not on TOPS, they're not on CITES, you're loaning it inside South Africa, there's no permit needed. Sending it outside of the country, and we've been trying to get clarity from the government on this. If it's just a loan that will be returned, I don't think you need a permit, unless it's CITES listed, then you do need a permit. I don't know if anybody can, but if you're donating material, so if it's a tissue sample going out of the country, then you need an export permit. Kim, do you want to come in here about this issue? Remember, there was something about, or was it you?
We had an issue with pangolin scales because there was a project to develop, they were using sniffer dogs. They were training them to detect pangolin scales in crates. And we handed over pangolin scales because it was to, I'm just trying to think who it was. I think it was the the airport customs. So we handed over the scales because they wanted to export them to another country. That's the only reason that the Deaf Office found out that we had handed these samples over, and they asked for the permits. So even now, if any researcher within South Africa does research on a TOPS listed species, even though we've got a standing permit, they now have to apply for a TOPS permit so that we can hand over subsamples or aliquots to them as the new owner, even though they'll be using it up in the lab doing the DNA extraction or for whatever the research project is, they still need a TOPS permit. So we have to wait until we've got all of the permits in place before we can hand the samples over now.
Oh, it's hectic, hey? And then other people who send, so Alpheus, you do a lot of sending material overseas, plants, but do you ever have permits for sending loans overseas?
I currently do not have a permit. Last year, when I tried to seek permit with Karen, there are forms that needed to be signed, and apparently that requires the CEO, and it's a long process. I have the form with me right now. Actually, even Karen couldn't assist me, which means already I am failing to fulfill some of the activities. And I only sent information to the requesting institution in Kiev so that they can fill the forms where they are supposed to. And they supplied me with that information. But locally here, I couldn't submit anywhere because it should go through the permitting office. So there is no permit so far that I'm using to send material outside.
Okay, so do you normally just send a loan? So if somebody from Kew or Missouri asks you for a loan of these plants, you send it overseas without a permit on a loan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so I think that's the norm. I think unless it's CITES, I think it's fine. Unless also now there's the National Resource, SARA, the Heritage Resource Agency, and there's a legislation for that. And so in that legislation, it says any specimen, any type specimen that you want to send overseas, whether it's on loan or anything, you have to get a SARA permit now. You have to get a heritage permit.
Mm.
They'll check. So you have to apply to them. What we've said to them is, what they've said is very unclear what type. There's holotypes, paratypes, lectotypes, topotypes, what types, and why should we do this? Because we have to get export permits for most of our stuff anyway. So at the moment, we've said to them, any specimen that's more than 100 years old or the name-bearing type. So then you probably have to get a permit, even if it's on loan only. You still have to get a SARA permit. So can you see how insane this whole permitting world is? It's completely insane. But we have to try and find a way forward with it. All right. So Lise gave us some good advice here. She said there are landowner permission templates available online that one can adapt and have set terms and conditions. So Lee, we might need to get that link from you. Daniela says they get landowner permission 90% of the time. So it must be written, signed. Thousands of specimens, yeah. So those are fine. We found our way forward with them. Sometimes you might not be able to send them overseas because that might be the export, you might not be able to get an export permit, or you might not be able to use them for any kind of bioprospecting research. But yeah, there's nothing you can do about them. Oh, so this is from Rindani, I think. If you're buying, so section 20, you need a permit from a supplier of that product you're purchasing. Oh, yeah. Okay, so Eunice has asked about the permit to loan an insect outside or within the country. Yeah, so I think we've answered that. All right. Okay, all right. So were there any final hands, Fulu?
There was a hand from Bernard, but now it's down, so I don't know if he still wants to ask something.
Yeah, actually, I think it's probably been covered, and we've discussed this before. I think our big problem is even when a permit's not required or anything you want to put on loan overseas, if that gets seized by customs and excise or whatever, and they destroy it, there's nothing you can do about it. Also, with things like plants, often the problem isn't getting it out of the country, but getting the loan back into the country where they want to know where's permits and things. So we now have a policy for all of these things that there's a permit for whatever goes, but man, is it difficult, you know, for something like a plant. I think getting fossils overseas is actually relatively easy. We can get a permit for that within a short period of time. But for something as simple as a piece of wood that you want to temporarily export, you might never see it again. So often things we just mail would be things, if it gets destroyed, it wouldn't be the end of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think the whole world is going to be moving further and further away from loans and sending material all over the world. I think countries are going to be so paranoid about any biological material coming into their country after COVID, and you can understand. Okay. So I think Lee asked a question that was quite an important question for the people doing the course. When is your homework due? I think I come back at the university. When do we have to hand in our assignments? So I think we need to give it some thought. So what I'd originally thought about was not to have due dates for the assignments, and for people to put them all into a portfolio at the end and submit that. And then you manage your own time and schedule. And then the other day I had a bit of a panic attack thinking, is this going to be a disaster? Are we just am I setting everyone up for a disaster by not pushing people to submit as we go along? And you know, we're all the same. We'll delay and delay until the last minute. And then everyone will be scrambling to do their 10 assignments at the end. So sometime we're going to have to make a decision about whether we want to set deadlines the whole way through, or whether we're happy to let you manage yourself and your own time and schedule. So yeah, we'll get back to you, but I suggest you do work on that ethics policy review now while it's all fresh in your mind. That will be the best thing to do. Okay, so I think that we're going to close at this point, but I want to say thank you very much to our 3 panelists. I think it's very interesting to see the different perspectives of people. So, you know, herbarium. So thank you, Renee, for your insights. And then to Karin, a veterinary collection. And we can see all the challenges there. And then Kim with a biobank, a wildlife biobank, and to see all the paperwork and the challenges and the issues of working with animal material. So thank you very much to those 3. Thank you to Fulu and Chanel for setting up everything and for the advertising. And thank you to all of you for attending and for sharing and for providing very interesting questions that I think help us all to increase our knowledge and understanding of ethics and permits. All right, so thanks everyone. Thanks, and we'll see you soon. Bye.